The Galactic Council Chamber was the kind of place that made you feel small, stupid, and completely out of your league, which was exactly the point. Floating in the neutral zone between 17 different star systems, the station was a monument to alien superiority, with architecture that defied physics and lighting that gave everyone dramatic shadows. Very intimidating, very impressive. Absolutely designed to make newcomers wet themselves. Captain Jake Morrison was not impressed. Sure, the crystalline walls were pretty, and yes, the gravity-defying water features were cool, but Jake had seen Niagara Falls, and honestly, that was more impressive than some glowing space water that flowed upward. He adjusted his Earth Force uniform, which suddenly felt like it was made from discount polyester, compared to the exotic materials everyone else was wearing, and walked into the chamber like he owned the place. He did not own the place. He barely owned his apartment back in Houston. The council members turned to look at him, and Jake got his first real look at galactic high society. It was like someone had raided every science fiction movie ever made and thrown the costume department into a blender. There were beings made of crystal, beings made of light, beings that looked like they were made of bad decisions and regret. One of them was literally just a floating brain in a jar. No body, just brain. Apparently bodies were for amateurs. "Ah, the human has arrived," announced Ambassador Thexilor, a being that looked like someone had melted a purple lava lamp and given it a superiority complex. Thexilor's voice echoed through the chamber with the kind of condescension usually reserved for talking to houseplants. "How delightful. We were just discussing whether your species understands the concept of punctuality." "I'm 5 minutes early," Jake said flatly. "Yes, but you walked instead of teleporting. So provincial." Jake bit back about 12 different responses, all of which would have gotten Earth kicked out before they'd even gotten in. Instead, he smiled the kind of smile that said he was thinking those responses very loudly in his head. The Galactic Council had been running the show for over 50,000 years, managing alliances between thousands of species, and they treated new applicants like puppies who'd just learned to use the bathroom outside. Adorable, messy, probably going to pee on the carpet. Earth had applied for membership 6 months ago, right after humanity had finally cracked faster-than-light travel. It had taken the Council approximately 45 seconds to grant humanity probationary observer status, which was fancy talk for, you can watch but don't touch anything. They'd created the status specifically for humans. Before Earth showed up, the lowest rank was provisional member. Humanity had somehow ranked below that. "Please, take your seat," said Councillor Vexnara, gesturing to a spot that was very clearly not at the main table. It was off to the side, near the refreshment station, next to a potted plant. The plant had more voting rights than Jake did. Vexnara was a saurian, a species of 7-foot-tall reptilian beings who'd mastered quantum physics before humans had figured out fire. She looked at Jake the way a scientist looks at a particularly interesting bacteria culture. Curious, but ready to autoclave it if necessary. Jake sat down in his designated spot of shame and looked around. The Varkothians, massive crystalline warriors who'd conquered half the galaxy through sheer intimidation and really good PR, sat at the head table looking like they'd been carved from angry diamonds. The Quilnari, a hive mind species that communicated telepathically, occupied 7 seats but were technically one entity, which seemed like cheating but apparently was allowed. Everyone looked important, ancient, and extremely confident that humans were about to provide the entertainment portion of today's meeting. "Now then," Thexilor continued, "let us begin today's session. First order of business, reviewing the human application for full membership." The ambassador pulled up a holographic display that showed Earth's statistics compared to other species. It was not flattering. In fact, it was the galactic equivalent of a participation trophy. As we can see, humans rank last in military capability, second to last in technological advancement, and third to last in diplomatic experience. They do, however, rank first in something called reality television, which our analysts assure us is not actually real. Several council members made sounds that might have been laughter. Jake couldn't tell. Alien laughter sounded like everything from wind chimes to dying whales. "Your species has been in space for approximately 200 years, Vexnara added, consulting her data tablet. That is, in galactic terms, less than a commercial break. Most species achieve council membership after a minimum of 5,000 years of spacefaring civilization. You are, mathematically speaking, babies. Adorable babies, added someone from the back who looked like a sentient fern. Jake raised his hand. Nobody acknowledged it. He raised it higher. Still nothing. He stood up. Question. Observers do not ask questions, Thexeler said. They observe. It is in the title. Right, but I've been observing some things and I'm confused about your membership criteria. You said we need 5,000 years of space travel experience, but the Zrathian Collective achieved membership after only 3,000 years. The room went quiet. Vexenara's eye twitched, which was impressive because Saurians didn't really have eye-twitching muscles. The Zrathians were a special case. Special how? They brought excellent appetizers to their application meeting. Jake blinked. We're ranking civilizations by their snack game. Among other factors, yes. This was going to be a long probationary period. The council sessions happened every galactic week, which translated to every 9 Earth days, which meant Jake was going to be spending a lot of time feeling inadequate in a very expensive conference room. Today's agenda included trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and apparently a 40-minute discussion about proper quantum field etiquette that went completely over Jake's head. He understood maybe every 7th word, and those were mostly the and. The Varkothian Empire wishes to address the council regarding the mining rights in Sector 7, announced High Commander Krill, a Varkothian who looked like someone had taught an angry mountain to wear armor. His voice sounded like grinding continental plates, and every word felt like a minor threat. We claim ancestral dominance over these territories through right of conquest, historical precedent, and the fact that we are very large and you are not. The Quilnari Collective disputes this claim, said the Quilnari representatives in perfect unison, because they shared one brain across 7 bodies, which was efficient but deeply unsettling. We have economic projections showing mutual benefit through shared resource extraction and distribution protocols aligned with subsection 47 of the Galactic Trade Agreement, Amendment 6312. Jake tried to follow along. He really did. But somewhere between quantum mineral distribution matrices and fourth-dimensional property rights, his brain started playing elevator music. Back on Earth, disputes like this were solved by whoever had the bigger army or the better lawyer. Here, they solved them with mathematics so complex it probably violated several laws of physics. Observer Morrison, Thexeler said suddenly, and Jake snapped to attention. You appear confused. Perhaps your species requires a simpler explanation. We could use smaller words, possibly pictures. I'm following just fine, Jake lied. Wonderful. Then please explain the difference between quantum-entangled resource rights and classical property distribution models. One's got quantum in it? The council members made that weird laughter sound again. One of them, a being made entirely of geometric shapes that kept rearranging themselves, literally fell apart from laughing and had to reassemble. Humans, Thexeler sighed, are perhaps the most endearing species we have encountered in millennia. You have mastered faster-than-light travel through what our scientists call aggressive stubbornness and mathematical vandalism. Your first contact protocol involved sending a probe that played something called classic rock at hostile vessels. Your diplomats negotiate in what you call good faith, which appears to mean trusting people for no logical reason whatsoever. It's worked so far, Jake muttered. Yes, well, space is far less forgiving than your planetary disputes over imaginary lines and economic systems. Here, mistakes are measured in extinct civilizations. Vexenara pulled up another holographic display, this time showing a ranking of all council species across various categories. Humanity was at the bottom of almost every list. Dead last in military strength, beaten only by the Paxian Collective, a species of sentient flowers who'd achieved peace through weaponized pollination. Second to last in technological advancement, just ahead of the Glorpians, who'd only discovered fire last century, but had really committed to it. Third to last in diplomatic experience, ranking above 2 species that communicated exclusively through interpretive dance. However, Vexenara continued, and her tone shifted slightly, Humans do rank first in one category: survival instances that defy statistical probability. That's not a real category, Jake said. It is now. We created it specifically for your species because our analysts could not comprehend how you are still alive. Excuse me? Vexnara pulled up Earth's historical data, and suddenly the holographic display was showing humanity's greatest hits and biggest failures, which were often the same events. Your planet has experienced 5 mass extinction events, and your species survived all of them through what appears to be spite and blind luck. You have fought approximately 14,000 wars against yourselves, and instead of going extinct, you invented medicine, democracy, and pizza. You have nearly destroyed your planet 47 times in the last century alone through nuclear weapons, climate disasters, and something called TikTok challenges. To be fair, TikTok challenges are mostly harmless, Jake offered. 300 injuries per year suggests otherwise. The Council was staring at humanity's track record like it was a particularly baffling puzzle. One species, the Morphidians who could see probability streams, looked physically ill trying to calculate Earth's survival odds. The statistical probability of humanity reaching spacefaring status was 0.0003%, a Morphidian named Seervelix announced, their multiple eyes swirling with confusion. Yet here you are. Every model we run suggests you should have gone extinct during your Bronze Age collapse, or your medieval period, or your 20th century, or your 21st century, or last Tuesday. What happened last Tuesday? Jake asked. According to our data, a human nearly started a nuclear incident because they thought a microwave timer was a countdown to Armageddon. Oh, that. Kevin's an idiot. We don't count Kevin. You should probably count Kevin. Kevin represents a statistically significant portion of your species' decision-making patterns. This was getting worse. Jake had walked into the Galactic Council thinking Earth would be seen as a young but promising civilization, full of potential and determination. Instead, they were the galaxy's favorite comedy show, the species that shouldn't exist, but kept showing up anyway, like a cockroach at a 5-star restaurant. So what you're saying, Jake said slowly, is that we're the galactic equivalent of that one friend who shows up to every party uninvited but somehow makes it better? No, Thexler said. We are saying you are the friend who shows up uninvited, sets something on fire accidentally, and then fixes it with duct tape and misplaced confidence. And yet you let us join anyway. We let you observe. There is a difference. Right. So when do we get to actually participate? The entire council exchanged looks, the kind of looks parents give each other when their toddler asks to drive the car. Humans will be granted full membership when they demonstrate sufficient understanding of galactic politics, diplomacy, and the ability to not accidentally start wars through cultural misunderstandings. How long does that usually take? For most species? 500 years. For humans? Vexnara did some calculations on her tablet. Our current estimate is never. We have literally calculated that never is more probable than humanity achieving full membership requirements. Jake sat back in his designated shame chair next to the potted plant. The plant seemed to judge him. Everything in this stupid station judged him. Well, he said finally, guess I'll just keep observing then. Excellent choice, Thexler said. Do try not to touch anything. Last time we had a species on probationary status, they accidentally declared war on 3 systems by pressing the wrong button. What happened to them? They are no longer on probationary status. They are no longer on any status. They are no longer. Jake decided not to touch anything. 3 weeks into his probationary observer status, Jake had learned several important things about galactic politics. First, meetings that could have been emails were apparently a universal constant. Second, aliens loved bureaucracy almost as much as humans did, which was saying something. Third, the Galactic Council moved at the speed of continental drift, and that was being generous to continental drift. So when the emergency alarm went off during session 47, everyone seemed almost relieved to have something interesting happen. Emergency status alert, announced the station's AI, which sounded British for some reason. Apparently, even alien computers thought British accents made everything sound more official. The Zrathian Empire has established a military blockade around Nexus Station 7. All trade routes have been suspended. Galactic incident level, extremely problematic. The council chamber erupted into controlled panic, which looked like regular panic but with more hand gestures and glowing displays. Vexnara pulled up tactical information showing Nexus Station 7 surrounded by approximately 300 Zrathian warships, each one roughly the size of Manhattan and significantly more hostile. "This is unprecedented," High Commander Krill announced, slamming one massive crystalline fist on the table hard enough to crack it. "The Zrathians have violated 17 treaties, 42 trade agreements, and basic common decency. We must respond with diplomatic pressure," the Quilnari said in unison. "Economic sanctions paired with strategic negotiations through back channels established during the Third Accord. That will take months," Thexelor objected. "Possibly years. The Zrathians are not known for their patience or reasonable listening skills." "Then we show military force," Krill suggested. "Position the Varkothian fleet at the border. Remind them why we are called warriors." "And risk galactic war?" Vexnara shook her head. "The Zrathian Empire controls 60 systems. A direct conflict would devastate half the galaxy and produce casualty estimates in the billions." Jake watched the council argue, pulling up probability matrices, historical precedents, and diplomatic frameworks that looked like they'd been written by committee and approved by bigger committees. Everyone had solutions, and all of them seemed to involve months of careful planning, strategic positioning, and a whole lot of meetings to plan the meetings about the actual plan. It was the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, and they were about to solve this crisis the same way Earth's governments solved everything, slowly, carefully, and with maximum paperwork. "Why don't we just ask them what they want?" Jake said. The council stopped talking. Every being in the chamber turned to look at him like he'd just suggested they solve the problem by challenging the Zrathians to a dance-off. "I'm sorry," Thexelor said slowly. "Did the observer just suggest we ask the hostile military force what they want?" "Yeah, I mean, they blockaded a trade station. Either they want something from the station, or they want leverage to negotiate something else. So let's just open a channel and ask. Worst case, they say no, and we're back where we started. Best case, we solve this before lunch." "That is not how galactic diplomacy works," Vexnara said. But she sounded uncertain. "How does it work?" "We establish diplomatic protocols, verify security channels, arrange preliminary discussions through intermediaries, schedule formal negotiations with appropriate witnesses, and proceed through 17 stages of conflict resolution frameworks established by the Fourth Galactic Accord." "Right, but that takes months." "Proper diplomacy requires time," Observer Morrison. "And what happens to the people on that station while we're doing proper diplomacy? They've got, 2 weeks of supplies? 3? Silence. Apparently nobody had thought about that part. "I'm opening a channel," Jake said, and before anyone could stop him, he'd pulled up the communication interface and started broadcasting directly to the Zrathian blockade. The council looked horrified, like Jake had just kicked a hornet's nest made of nuclear weapons. The screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at Warlord Krath Zul, Supreme Commander of the Zrathian fleet and owner of the galaxy's most impressive collection of face spikes. The Zrathians looked like someone had crossed a porcupine with a tank and given it anger management issues. Krath Zul had enough spikes to open a hardware store, and his expression suggested he'd be happy to demonstrate their sharpness. "Who dares interrupt Zrathian operations?" Krath Zul's voice sounded like rocks having a disagreement. "Hi, I'm Captain Jake Morrison from Earth. We haven't met, but you're blocking one of our trade stations, and we'd like to know why." "Your trade stations? Pathetic human, that station belongs to no one. It is neutral territory." "Right, exactly. Neutral, which means you're blocking everyone's trade station. So what's the deal? Are you trying to send a message? Make a point? Or did someone at the station insult your mother?" The council members looked like they were about to have collective heart attacks. You couldn't just ask a warlord if someone insulted his mother. That wasn't diplomacy. That was suicide by conversation. But Krath Zul didn't vaporize them. Instead, he leaned forward, spikes bristling with what might have been curiosity. "You speak directly. Most species waste time with pleasantries and fear." "Yeah, well, I don't have time for pleasantries, and fear hasn't solved anything since forever. So, I'll ask again. What do you want?" Krath Zul's expression shifted. The Council refuses to acknowledge Zrathian territorial claims to the outer reaches. They hide behind treaties written by species who feared our strength. We blockade the station to demonstrate that their rules mean nothing without power to enforce them. Okay, so you want recognition and respect. Got it. Here's my question. Does blockading a trade station full of random civilians get you that recognition? It gets their attention. Sure, but attention isn't respect. You've got 300 warships surrounding a glorified shopping mall. That's not intimidating. That's overkill. You know what's actually intimidating? Having the power to destroy something and choosing not to. That's the kind of strength that makes people respect you. The chamber went dead quiet. Jake was either about to solve a galactic crisis or start a war, and honestly it was 50-50 at this point. Krathzul stared at him for a long moment. You suggest we withdraw? I'm suggesting you make a different point. Right now you look like bullies picking on civilians, but if you withdrew voluntarily and demanded formal negotiations instead, you'd look like the bigger species. Plus, the Council would have to take your territorial claims seriously, or they'd look weak for ignoring a peaceful request. You would do this? Bring our claims to the Council? Jake glanced at the Council members, who all looked somewhere between impressed and terrified. Yeah, I'll make sure they listen. But you've got to pull back the fleet first. Can't negotiate under threat of violence. That's not strength, that's just extortion. Krathzul considered this. His spikes rippled in what might have been Zrathian laughter. You have courage, human. Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. Very well, we will withdraw and await formal negotiations. But if the Council refuses us again, we will blockade something more important than a trade station. Fair enough. Let's call that Plan B. The transmission ended. The Council stared at Jake like he'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat, except the rabbit was galactic peace, and the hat was sheer audacity. Did that human just solve a potential war in 5 minutes? Someone whispered. I believe he did, Vexenara said quietly. Thexilor's purple lava lamp body was vibrating. That was the most reckless, unprofessional, and completely inappropriate diplomatic intervention I have ever witnessed. But it worked, Jake said. Yes, that is what concerns me. The Council reconvened 3 hours later in emergency session, and this time Jake wasn't sitting next to the potted plant. He'd been moved to an actual chair at an actual table, which felt like a promotion, but might have been them keeping him closer so they could monitor him for signs of further chaos. We need to discuss what just happened, Vexenara announced, pulling up footage of Jake's conversation with Warlord Krathzul. She replayed it 3 times, each time freezing on different moments like she was analyzing a crime scene. Observer Morrison violated approximately 47 diplomatic protocols, bypassed every established security channel, and directly negotiated with a hostile force without authorization or backup. And it worked, High Commander Krill added, sounding impressed despite himself. The Zrathian fleet withdrew peacefully. No casualties, no shots fired, no galactic incident. The human accomplished in 5 minutes what would have taken us 6 months. That is precisely the problem, Thexilor said. It should not have worked. Every probability model we have suggests that approach should have resulted in escalation, not resolution. The Zrathians respect only strength, and humans have virtually none. Yet somehow, Observer Morrison convinced a warlord to stand down through conversation. So what's the issue? Jake asked. The issue is we do not understand how you did it. The Quilnari Collective has analyzed the conversation from 17 different psychological angles, and your approach defies every established negotiation framework. The Quilnari representatives nodded in unison. You employed no formal diplomatic language, offered no concrete concessions, and made several statements that should have been considered insulting. By all models, the warlord should have ended the communication and increased the blockade. Instead, he cooperated. I just talked to him like a person, Jake said. Turns out warlords have feelings too. Who knew? Vexenara pulled up more displays, these ones showing Earth's historical records. We have been studying human conflict resolution patterns, and we have discovered something deeply disturbing. Humans do not follow logical negotiation patterns. Instead, you employ something our analysts are calling aggressive improvisation paired with emotional manipulation and inexplicable confidence. That's just called talking. No, Observer Morrison. Talking is the exchange of information through established communication protocols. What you did was perform social engineering on a military commander using charm, misdirection, and psychology so advanced it appears accidental. Jake blinked. I didn't do anything advanced. I just asked him what he wanted and pointed out that his approach wasn't getting him anywhere. Exactly, the Quilnari said. You identified the core emotional motivation beneath the tactical objective and reframed the situation to align his goals with peaceful resolution. That requires sophisticated psychological modeling, rapid behavioral analysis, and the ability to build rapport with a hostile entity in under 90 seconds. Or I just, talk to him. You keep saying that, Vexilor said, but I do not think you understand what you are describing. Most species require years of training to negotiate with hostile forces. Humans appear to do it instinctively. Vexinara pulled up more Earth data, and suddenly the display was showing humanity's greatest diplomatic achievements and biggest blunders, which again were often the same events. Your species ended the Cuban Missile Crisis through back-channel negotiations that bypassed official protocols. You established peace treaties by having soldiers share cigarettes in trenches. You once resolved a hostage situation by ordering pizza for the hostage takers and talking to them about their feelings for 6 hours. The pizza thing really works, Jake confirmed. It should not work. By all logical analysis, providing sustenance to hostile actors should reinforce their position and extend the crisis. Instead, it humanizes the situation and creates reciprocal obligation psychology. Right, or they're just hungry and less angry with food. Occam's razor. What is Occam's razor? It's a problem-solving principle. The simplest explanation is usually correct. The council members looked at each other with what might have been concern. Your species has a named principle for choosing simple explanations? Yeah, several actually. We've got Occam's razor, Murphy's law, and the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. You have acronyms for simplicity. It's a whole thing. Vexinara was typing rapidly on her tablet, running calculations that were making her computer smoke slightly. I am running probability simulations on human problem-solving approaches compared to galactic standard methods. According to this data, humans solve complex problems by ignoring complexity and treating them as simple problems. This should fail catastrophically, approximately 97% of the time. But it doesn't, Jake guessed. No. It succeeds approximately 63% of the time, which is statistically identical to our advanced modeling success rates, except you arrive at solutions in a fraction of the time using a fraction of the resources. So we're efficient? You are terrifyingly reckless with inexplicable results. High Commander Krill leaned forward, his crystalline face reflecting light in ways that suggested deep thought. I have reviewed Earth's military history. Your species has fought wars using tactics that our strategists classify as should not work, but did anyway. You once won a battle by pretending to retreat, then ambushing the enemy when they pursued. This is considered basic strategy now, but you invented it through desperation. That's the Mongols, great people, terrible house guests. You survived multiple extinction events through adaptation so rapid it violates evolutionary biology models. Your species went from Bronze Age technology to space travel in approximately 5,000 years. Most species require 50,000. You compressed advanced development into 1/10 the expected time frame. We're overachievers. You are anomalies, Vexinara corrected. And anomalies make the Council nervous. Jake was starting to understand the problem. The Galactic Council had been running things the same way for 50,000 years, using careful planning, advanced mathematics, and protocols so complex they required quantum computers to process. Then humanity showed up and started solving problems by winging it, talking to people like they were people, and treating the galaxy's most serious crises like they were just another Tuesday. You want me to give a speech? Jake asked. We want you to explain why we should trust your species with full Council authority, despite every statistical model suggesting you will accidentally destroy something important. That's not encouraging. It is not meant to be. Proceed. Jake stood up, walked to the center of the chamber, and looked around at 2,417 different species, each one more advanced, more powerful, and more qualified than humanity. They were waiting for him to prove Earth deserved a seat at the table. No pressure. He cleared his throat. So, here's the thing about humans. We're not the strongest species. The Varkothians could bench press our entire planet without breaking a sweat. Assuming they have sweat, which I'm not actually sure about. We're not the smartest. The Quilnari have literally shared consciousness and can think in dimensions we don't have names for. We're not the most advanced. Half of you have technology that we think is magic, and the other half have technology that's so advanced it looks like magic, pretending to be science. This is not a compelling argument for membership, Thexiler noted. I'm getting there. The point is, we're not winning any superlatives. Earth isn't going to be voted most likely to succeed or best in show. We're the species that barely made it here, and everyone knows it. But here's what we are good at. We're really, really good at being told we can't do something and then doing it anyway. A ripple of what might have been interest went through the crowd. Humans have been told we can't fly, so we invented airplanes. We were told we can't survive in space, so we built space stations. We were told we'd destroy ourselves with nuclear weapons. And okay, we almost did that one. But we didn't. And that counts. Every impossible problem humanity has faced, we've solved it by treating it like a puzzle instead of a death sentence. We fail constantly, spectacularly, and publicly. Then we get back up and try something different. This is the trial and error approach you described, Vexnara said. Yeah, but it's more than that. It's about attitude. See, most species hit a wall and calculate the probability of getting through it. If the math says it's impossible, you accept that and find another route. That's logical. That's smart. But humans, we hit that wall and our first thought is, how do we break it? We don't accept impossibility as an answer because we're either too stubborn or too stupid to know when to quit. Usually both. You are describing recklessness, a Morphidian called out. No, I'm describing persistence. Recklessness is ignoring danger. Persistence is acknowledging danger and deciding you're going to deal with it anyway. There's a difference. Jake paced the center of the chamber, warming up to his topic. Earth's history is full of people who were told they were crazy, impossible, or doomed to fail. The Wright brothers were told humans would never fly. They flew anyway. Kennedy said we'd go to the moon when we barely had rockets. We went anyway. Every major human achievement started with someone saying it can't be done, and a human responding with "watch me." But you fail frequently, someone pointed out. Absolutely. We fail all the time. Our history books are full of spectacular failures, but here's the secret. We fail forward. Every failure teaches us something. Every mistake becomes data for the next attempt. We don't see failure as the end of the story. We see it as the middle chapter, the part where things get difficult before they get better. The council members were listening now, really listening. Even Thexilor had stopped glowing dismissively. You want to know why you should give humanity full membership? It's not because we're perfect. We're not. It's not because we'll never make mistakes. We absolutely will. It's because we represent something this council has forgotten after 50,000 years of careful planning and risk assessment. Sometimes you have to try things that might not work. Sometimes the best solution isn't the one with the highest probability of success. Sometimes it's the one that nobody's tried yet because everyone assumed it was impossible. You are suggesting we embrace uncertainty, Vexnara said. I'm suggesting you embrace possibility. You've built an incredible civilization on mathematics, logic, and careful protocol. That's gotten you far, but it's also made you slow, cautious, and afraid of change. Meanwhile, humanity showed up 5 minutes ago with duct tape and audacity, and we've already solved problems you've been working on for centuries. Not because we're better, but because we're different. We think differently. We approach problems differently. We're the chaos to your order, and you need both. Krill stood up, his crystalline form reflecting the chamber's lights. The human speaks truth. The Varkothian Empire has existed for 30,000 years, and in that time we have become mighty but predictable. We solve every problem through strength, because strength has always worked. But strength cannot solve everything, as Morrison has demonstrated. Sometimes you need to talk instead of fight. Sometimes you need to improvise instead of plan. Sometimes you need a human to tell a warlord he's being ridiculous and somehow make that work. Several council members laughed, which Jake took as a good sign. Humanity's inclusion in this council will change us, Vexenara said. The question is whether that change will be positive or catastrophic. Why not both? Jake offered. Change is always messy. It's uncomfortable, unpredictable, and it forces you to adapt. But adaptation is how you survive. The universe doesn't care about your careful plans. It's going to throw problems at you that don't fit your models, crises that don't have precedent, and situations where the right answer is the one nobody's thought of yet. When that happens, you're going to need people who are good at making it up as they go along. You are essentially arguing that human incompetence is actually strategic flexibility, Thexler said. I'm arguing that what you call incompetence, we call innovation. Same behavior, different perspective. The Quilnari collective spoke in unison, their 7 voices creating harmonics. We have processed Morrison's argument through all available analytical frameworks. The conclusion is paradoxical. By every logical measure, humanity should not receive full membership. But by denying membership, we would be demonstrating the exact inflexibility Morrison criticizes. Therefore, to remain consistent with our principles of logical governance, we must do the illogical thing and grant membership. That reasoning hurts my brain, someone muttered. Welcome to negotiating with humans, another replied. Vexenara stood, and the chamber fell silent. The council will vote on Earth's petition for full membership. All those in favor of granting humanity full council status with all associated rights and responsibilities, indicate now. Jake held his breath. This was it. Either humanity was about to become a full partner in galactic civilization, or they'd just set a record for fastest rejection in council history. Lights appeared throughout the chamber, each one representing a vote. Green for yes, red for no. Jake watched them flicker to life like fireflies in the darkness. Green, green, red, green, 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 red, green. And it was working. That was the scary part. It was actually working. So what happens now? Jake asked. Thexler's lava lamp body rippled with something that might have been resignation. Now we discuss whether humanity's methods represent a viable alternative to established galactic protocols, or whether you are simply lucky idiots who will eventually run out of luck. Why not both? That is also concerning. Word spread fast. Faster than light speed, actually, which was impressive considering that was supposed to be the universal speed limit. Within a galactic week, every species in council space had heard about the human who'd talked down a Zrathian warlord like he was negotiating a parking ticket. Jake had become accidentally famous, which was his least favorite kind of famous. His communication console was flooded with requests. The Vexarian Commerce Guild wanted help negotiating trade disputes. The Clernoid Confederacy needed advice on a border conflict. Someone called the Morthian Cluster was having a civil war and wanted to know if Jake could do that thing humans do where you just fix stuff somehow. Jake had become the galaxy's unwilling therapist, and he wasn't even qualified to be Earth's therapist. This is unsustainable, Vexenara said during an emergency council meeting. Observer Morrison has received 47,000 consultation requests in the last 72 hours. Species are bypassing established diplomatic channels and going directly to the human. Perhaps because the human gets results, High Commander Creel suggested. He'd warmed up to Jake after the Zrathian incident, probably because warriors respected results more than protocols. The Quilnari civil dispute that has lasted 3 centuries, Morrison solved it in 2 days. By telling them to agree to disagree and split into separate hive minds, Thexler said, sounding scandalized. That is not a solution. That is giving up. But it worked, Creel countered. Both Quilnari factions are now peaceful, independent, and actually happy. Before Morrison's intervention, our best projection was another 2 centuries of conflict. What about the Varkothian honor dispute? Someone asked. Thumb wrestling tournament, Jake said. They loved it. Called it the most honorable combat they'd experienced in decades. You reduced sacred Varkothian combat traditions to a children's game. Hey, they're the ones who wanted to fight about who had better military decorations. I just gave them a way to settle it without actual casualties. They're already planning an annual championship. The council looked at him like he was a particularly interesting disease they couldn't decide whether to cure or study. Morrison, Vexnara said carefully, do you understand what you are doing to galactic civilization? Helping? Destabilizing. You are destabilizing 50,000 years of carefully balanced diplomatic protocols with what you call common sense. If your protocols take 3 centuries to solve basic disputes, maybe they need some destabilizing. The chamber went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop if pins made sounds when dropping in space, which they didn't. But the metaphor stood. He has a point, Krill said finally. Our systems are effective but slow. By the time we resolve conflicts through proper channels, entire generations have lived and died waiting for solutions. The human approach is fast, informal, and statistically just as effective. It is also unpredictable, Thexular argued. We cannot build civilization on unpredictability. Why not? Jake asked. Every human civilization has been built on unpredictability. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so we make plans and adjust when stuff inevitably goes wrong. That's not a bug, that's a feature. That is chaos. No, chaos is what happens when your rigid systems can't adapt fast enough to handle new problems. Flexibility is what keeps you alive when the universe throws curveballs. Vexnara was running more calculations, and her expression suggested the numbers were not making her happy. I have analyzed conflict resolution data from the past 6 months. Since Morrison's arrival and his interventions, galactic conflict resolution time has decreased by 43%. Satisfaction ratings with Council diplomatic services have increased by 67%, and we have received membership applications from 17 new species who specifically cited Morrison's approach as their reason for wanting to join. So, I'm good for business? Jake said. You are terrifying for established order. Again, why not both? The Morphidians, who could see probability streams, were having what looked like a collective anxiety attack. Seer Velix was staring at calculations that kept changing, rearranging themselves like they couldn't decide what reality they wanted to be part of. This is impossible. Human decision patterns should not create stable outcomes. You operate on instinct, emotion, and something our translators call vibes. This is not a foundation for diplomatic success. But it is successful, Krill pointed out. That is what makes it impossible. Jake was starting to feel bad for the Morphidians. They were probability-based beings trying to understand a species that succeeded by ignoring probability. It was like asking a computer to calculate infinity. Technically possible, but it might cause a crash. Look, Jake said, I get that this is weird for you. Your whole civilization is built on careful planning, mathematical certainty, and really long committee meetings. Humans don't do that because we can't. We live maybe 100 years if we're lucky, and we spend half of that figuring out what we're doing. We don't have time for 3-century-long negotiations. We have to solve problems fast, adapt faster, and hope we don't accidentally blow ourselves up in the process. You have nearly blown yourselves up multiple times, Vexnara noted. Exactly. Nearly. But we didn't, and that's the point. We're really good at catching problems right before they become catastrophes, fixing them with duct tape and spite, and moving on to the next disaster. You call it chaos. We call it Tuesday. But what happens when your luck runs out? Thexular asked. What happens when instinct fails and improvisation does not work? Then we try something else. That's the other thing humans are good at. Failing forward. We mess up constantly, but we mess up in new and interesting ways, and eventually we stumble into something that works. The council members exchanged looks that ranged from fascinated to horrified. You are describing civilization built on trial and error, the Quilnari said. Yep. That should not work. And yet, they agreed reluctantly. Vexnara closed her tablet with a definitive click. The council must make a decision. Do we continue with our established protocols and risk obsolescence, or do we adapt to incorporate human methods despite not understanding them? I vote for adaptation, Krill said immediately. The galaxy is changing. If we do not change with it, we become irrelevant. I vote for caution, Thexular countered. We should study human methods more thoroughly before implementing them galaxy-wide. By the time we finish studying them, we will have missed the opportunity to benefit from them, Krill argued. They were about to start a full debate when Jake stood up. Can I make a suggestion? Observers do not make suggestions, Thexular said automatically, then caught himself. although apparently observers also do not solve galactic crises. Yet here we are. Proceed. How about you don't choose? Keep your protocols for stuff that needs careful planning. Use human-style approaches for urgent problems that need fast solutions. You don't have to rebuild your whole civilization. Just add another tool to the toolbox. The simplicity of it seemed to break something in the council. They'd been ready for a complicated philosophical debate about the nature of governance and diplomatic frameworks, and Jake had just suggested they treat it like buying a new hammer. That is, Vexenara said slowly, actually reasonable. It is disturbingly practical, Thexelor admitted. It is very human, Krill said, and it sounded like a compliment. The council voted. It was close, but practicality won out over tradition, which Jake figured was progress. They agreed to establish what they called the Rapid Response Diplomatic Initiative, which was a fancy way of saying they'd let Jake and other humans try the whole just-talk-to-people approach when time was critical. For everything else, they'd stick with their 50,000-year-old bureaucracy because apparently some things were too sacred to fix. Jake got promoted from probationary observer to provisional diplomatic consultant, which meant he still couldn't vote, but now they'd actually listen when he talked. It was like being moved from the kids' table to the adults' table, except he still had to use a plastic fork. But the promotion came with a catch. You will need to explain human diplomatic methods to the council, Vexenara informed him. We must understand what you do so we can replicate it. I don't think you can replicate instinct. We must try. The galaxy is watching, Morrison. If humans can solve in days what takes us years, every species will want to know how. You have accidentally become the most important diplomatic figure in council space. That's horrifying. Yes, she agreed. Welcome to leadership. Jake spent the next week trying to explain human problem-solving to species that thought in quantum mathematics and probability streams. It went about as well as expected, which is to say it was a disaster wrapped in confusion and tied with a bow of mutual frustration. You were saying humans solve problems by feeling? Asked a Morphidian analyst who looked like they were having an existential crisis. Not exactly. We use logic, but we also factor in emotion, context, and gut instinct. It's like a combination of thinking and feeling. That is not a methodology. That is chaos with extra steps. Sure, but it's effective chaos. The Quilnari tried to understand it through their hive mind collective consciousness. We process information through shared neural networks that allow instantaneous consensus. Humans have individual brains that often disagree with each other. How do you make decisions? Usually we argue until someone gives up or we compromise on something nobody really wants but everyone can tolerate. That sounds inefficient. It absolutely is. But it keeps everyone invested in the outcome because they all had to fight for it. Even Thexelor was struggling. Your species treats every problem as unique, rather than categorizing them into established problem types with proven solution frameworks. Because every problem is unique. Sure, they might look similar, but context changes everything. You can't just apply the same solution to every trade dispute and expect it to work. Why not? If the underlying economic principles remain constant, the solution should also remain constant. Because people aren't constants, they're variables. Angry variables with feelings and bad days and personal grudges. You can't math your way through that. We have been mathing our way through that for 50 millennia. And how's that working out? Thexelor didn't have an answer for that, which was answer enough. The training sessions became legendary throughout council space. Species would tune in to watch the human try to explain concepts like reading the room and playing it by ear to beings who calculated 17 moves ahead in every conversation. It was educational programming meets comedy hour, and the ratings were fantastic. But slowly, impossibly, some of it started to stick. The Varkothians began incorporating what they called honorable improvisation into their military academies. The Quilnari experimented with individual decision-making exercises to complement their hive mind consensus. Even the Morphidians started adding something they called intuitive probability assessment to their models, which was basically just guessing but with more dignity. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was somehow leading the charge despite being the newest, weakest, and least qualified species in council space. It was absurd. It was unprecedented. It was very, very human. And that was exactly what made the Council nervous. 3 months into Jake's provisional diplomatic consultant position, the Council called a full assembly. Not just the regular members, but representatives from every species in Council space, all 2,417 of them. The chamber had to expand 3 times to fit everyone, and the station's computer complained about structural stress and occupancy limits. Something big was happening, and Jake had a sinking feeling he was about to be at the center of it. The Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's petition for full membership, Vexnara announced, and the chamber went silent. You could have heard a pin drop in the vacuum of space, which was still physically impossible but emotionally accurate. However, before we render judgment, we wish to hear from Observer Morrison regarding humanity's intentions within the Galactic Council. The votes kept coming, more green than red, though not by as much as Jake would have liked. Some species were voting no, which was their right, but more were voting yes. More were willing to take a chance on humanity's particular brand of organized chaos. The final tally appeared on the central display, 1,803 in favor, 614 opposed. The motion passes, Vexnara announced. By authority of the Galactic Council, humanity is granted full membership status effective immediately. Welcome to the Council, Representative Morrison. The chamber erupted. Some species were cheering, some were complaining, and some were probably doing both simultaneously in languages Jake didn't speak. But it didn't matter because Earth had done it. Humanity had gone from probationary observer to full council member in 3 months, breaking every record and confusing every probability model in the process. Jake should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt terrified. Because now came the hard part, proving they deserved it. Krill approached him, massive and imposing, but somehow friendly. You have changed the galaxy, human. I hope you are prepared for what comes next. Probably not, Jake admitted. But we'll figure it out as we go. That is the most human statement I have ever heard. Thanks, I think. Thexler drifted over, still glowing purple and judgmental. Do not think this means we trust you, Morrison. You have been granted membership on probation. 1 major incident, 1 diplomatic catastrophe, and humanity will be expelled faster than you arrived. Fair enough. We'll try not to accidentally start any wars. That is not reassuring. It's the best I can offer. Vexnara was the last to approach, her reptilian features unreadable. You gave a compelling speech, Morrison. You almost made me believe humanity knows what it is doing. Almost. I am still a scientist. I require evidence, and 3 months is insufficient data for statistical significance. But I am willing to observe. Consider me cautiously optimistic. I'll take it. As the council members dispersed and the chamber began to empty, Jake stood there processing what had just happened. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council. Earth was officially part of the biggest, most advanced civilization in the galaxy. And somehow, against all odds and every probability model ever created, they'd done it by being themselves. Chaotic, unpredictable, and impossible to calculate. The galaxy would never be the same. And honestly, that was probably for the best. Somewhere on Earth, 8 billion humans were about to learn they were full members of galactic civilization. Some would be excited. Some would be terrified. Most would probably not care because they had jobs and bills and everyday problems that felt more immediate than space politics. But a handful of humans with the same stubborn persistence that had gotten them this far, would look up at the stars and think about what came next. What other impossible problems needed solving? What other walls needed breaking? What other species needed someone to look at their centuries-old conflicts and ask the most dangerous question in the universe? Why not try something different? Jake smiled. The galaxy had no idea what it had just signed up for. Neither did humanity. But that had never stopped them before.